The United States has long maintained one of the largest and most powerful military forces in the world. With a standing army numbering over 1 million active duty soldiers and millions more in reserves and other branches, the U.S. military plays a central role not only in national defense but also in global geopolitics. It is a major instrument of American power projection, diplomacy, and influence. Now, imagine a scenario where the U.S. decides to reduce the size of its army by a staggering 40%. What would that mean for the country's defense capabilities, its global role, its economy, and society at large? Would the U.S. be safer or more vulnerable? How would allies and adversaries react? Would such a reduction spark peace or invite instability? In this extensive analysis, we will explore these critical questions and more. To begin with, a 40% reduction in the U.S. Army would mean cutting nearly 400,000 active soldiers from the force. This is a massive downsizing that would reshape the structure, capabilities, and readiness of the Army. Recruitment efforts would slow or halt for certain roles. Existing soldiers might face early retirement or reassignment, and the military budget would likely be adjusted accordingly. But the implications go far beyond just numbers. From a strategic standpoint, the U.S. Army is the backbone of America's ground combat power. It is responsible for land operations, from large-scale conventional warfare to counterinsurgency and peacekeeping missions worldwide. Reducing its size drastically would force a reevaluation of military doctrine and priorities. The Army would likely have to focus on fewer theaters of operation, or rely more heavily on technology and special operations to compensate for smaller troop numbers. Such a cut could also impact the military's ability to respond simultaneously to multiple crises. The current U.S. defense strategy often assumes the capability to fight two major conflicts at once, such as a conflict in the Pacific and another in Europe. A 40% smaller army might make this impossible, forcing a prioritization of threats and regions, which could leave some areas less protected. The morale and culture within the Army could be affected as well. Soldiers facing force reductions may experience uncertainty and anxiety about their futures. Training programs and career paths would have to adapt. Leadership would face the challenge of maintaining cohesion and readiness amid significant change. On the flip side, a smaller army could lead to cost savings. The U.S. defense budget is massive, over $700 billion annually, with the Army accounting for a substantial share. Cutting personnel and related expenses might free up billions of dollars that could be redirected toward modernization, technology, or even social programs. However, the transition costs, including severance packages and restructuring expenses, would be significant. Geopolitically, the ripple effects would be profound. Allies who rely on U.S. military strength for their own security might feel uneasy or pressured to increase their own defense spending. NATO members, for example, have long depended on the U.S. to shoulder a large share of collective defense. A smaller U.S. Army might embolden adversaries like Russia or China, who could perceive the reduction as a weakening of American resolve and capability. In Asia-Pacific, where the U.S. seeks to counterbalance China's rising military power, a smaller army presence might force a recalibration of alliances and security arrangements. Countries like South Korea, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines might need to rethink their defense strategies, potentially leading to greater regional militarization or diplomatic shifts. On the other hand, some experts argue that a smaller, more agile military force, combined with technological advances such as drones, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence, could maintain or even enhance U.S. military effectiveness. Emphasizing quality over quantity, the Army could focus on specialized capabilities and rapid deployment forces rather than large conventional formations. Economically, reducing the Army's size would have mixed effects. The defense sector is a significant source of employment, both directly within the military and indirectly through defense contractors, suppliers, and supporting industries. Cutting 40% of soldiers might lead to job losses and reduced demand in these sectors, impacting communities heavily reliant on defense contracts. Conversely, reallocating funds could spur growth in other areas of the economy, particularly if investments are made in emerging technologies or infrastructure. The government might also need to implement programs to support transitioning soldiers into civilian jobs, retraining, and education. Socially, the Army plays a vital role beyond warfare. Many soldiers come from diverse backgrounds and benefit from education, training, and healthcare provided by the military. Downsizing could reduce these opportunities for young Americans, affecting social mobility and community stability in certain regions. The political landscape would be deeply affected. Debates over national security, military spending, and America's role in the world would intensify. Some would champion the reduction as a step toward peace and fiscal responsibility, while others would warn it endangers U.S. interests and emboldens enemies. Internationally, adversaries would closely watch the shift. Countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China might test perceived weaknesses through increased aggression, cyber attacks, or proxy conflicts. Conversely, some could see an opportunity for renewed diplomacy and arms control negotiations. From a defense innovation standpoint, a smaller army might accelerate the adoption of cutting-edge technologies. Investments in robotics, AI, hypersonic weapons, and cyber capabilities could offset manpower reductions. The military might rely more on remote operations and precision strikes rather than large troop deployments. The impact on veterans and their communities must also be considered. A large-scale drawdown could increase the number of veterans needing healthcare, employment assistance, and mental health support, placing additional pressure on the Department of Veterans Affairs and related services. Training and readiness could be compromised during the transition period. Maintaining high standards with fewer soldiers requires careful management. Exercises, deployments, and recruitment strategies would need to be recalibrated. The Army's role in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, both domestically and internationally, might be diminished. The military often provides critical support during natural disasters, pandemics, and crises. Fewer troops could mean slower or reduced responses, affecting civilian populations. In terms of strategic deterrence, the psychological impact of a smaller U.S. Army could alter global power dynamics. Potential adversaries might reconsider the risks of confrontation, potentially destabilizing regions where U.S. presence has helped maintain peace. Conversely, a leaner military might be more efficient, with enhanced inter-service cooperation between the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Space Force. Joint operations and integrated command structures could mitigate some risks associated with smaller numbers. The recruitment landscape would change dramatically. The military's appeal to young Americans could shift depending on public perception, benefits, and the evolving nature of warfare. Retaining experienced soldiers would become a priority, potentially increasing incentives and pay. The reduction could also trigger debates on conscription versus an all-volunteer force. In times of crisis, the U.S. might reconsider policies on the draft if the professional army is too small. Global alliances and partnerships could be stressed. The U.S. often engages in joint training exercises, military aid, and arms sales to support allies. A smaller army might reduce America's ability to fulfill these commitments, impacting global security architectures. From a diplomatic perspective, the reduction might encourage a greater emphasis on soft power, diplomacy, economic aid, cultural exchange, shifting the balance from hard power to more nuanced international engagement. There would also be consequences for military research and development. Defense budgets fund significant innovation that trickles down into civilian technology. Reductions might slow some projects or shift priorities toward fewer, high-impact programs. Environmental impacts could be positive. A smaller military footprint means less energy consumption, fewer bases, and potentially reduced environmental damage associated with training and operations. Public opinion would play a critical role. Citizens may welcome reduced military spending and fewer troops abroad, but concerns about national security might create divisions. Media coverage, political rhetoric, and international events would shape perceptions. Ultimately, the question remains: can the United States maintain its global leadership and security commitments with a 40% smaller army? Would such a move bring about a new era of peace and fiscal prudence, or would it create dangerous vulnerabilities? The answer lies in a complex balance of military strategy, technological innovation, international relations, economic adjustments, and social considerations.